Dozens of handprints cover the walls of the underground cavern in Mexico. What if the Euphrates River is not just drying but revealing something humanity was never meant to uncover beneath the collapsing riverbanks of ancient Euphrates? Explorers claim they discovered a hidden cave sealed beneath the mud for thousands of years. Inside were giant weapons-broken chains, massive handprints pressed into stone, and a tomb linked to the ancient kings of Uruk. Some believe the chamber may even connect to the four angels bound beneath the Euphrates in the book of Revelation. Could this be why Jesus warned the world about the signs of the last days, from strange whispers echoing through the cave walls to terrifying sounds rising beneath the earth even? Skeptics are shaken by what is being uncovered. If you believe we are living in prophetic times, leave a prayer to Jesus in the comments and stand boldly in your faith in a world growing darker and more unstable each day. The Euphrates River has been shrinking for years. Satellites confirmed it. Governments monitored it. Scientists documented the accelerating drought spreading across Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Yet as the river pulled farther away from its ancient banks, researchers began noticing something deeply unusual beneath the exposed ground. When scientists followed the break along the riverbank, they uncovered the entrance to a sealed cavern hidden beneath the Euphrates itself. Thick vegetation had covered it for generations, almost as if nature had intentionally concealed it from human eyes. But what happened next? Inside that cave pushed the entire team, beyond scientific curiosity into raw fear. With flashlights piercing the darkness, the team stepped inside. The air felt thick and oppressive. There, carved into the bedrock beneath the old riverbed, lay a massive sealed tomb, surrounded by giant pillars, broken clay, tablets. At the center rested a colossal stone sarcophagus covered in symbols, tied to immortality and the gods of ancient Mesopotamia. As workers slowly shifted the heavy lid, a sudden, overpowering smell of sulfur erupted from within. The stench was so strong it made the scientists choke and gasp for air. Overwhelming dread swept through the chamber. Several men staggered, backward, eyes watering, describing the atmosphere as heavy and malevolent. Panic took over. The river had uncovered something that felt alive with an ancient, unsettling presence. For thousands of years, the Euphrates has stood at the center of biblical history. Genesis 2:14 names it as one of the rivers flowing from Eden itself, linking this ancient waterway to the very beginning of humanity. One cannot help but wonder why hidden chambers, buried cities, and ancient tombs are appearing now, precisely as the prophetic river disappears before our eyes. And this was only the beginning of what the Euphrates is still willing to reveal. What they found beyond the tomb shattered whatever composure the team had left. Driven by a dangerous mix of fear and overwhelming curiosity, the archaeologists pressed deeper into the cave, despite the sulfur still burning in their lungs. Their flashlights cut through the thick darkness as they moved further inside, hearts racing. At first they thought the scattered fragments on the ground were nothing more than ordinary debris from time's decay, but as they brushed away centuries of dust, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Before them stood the remains of broken altars, their stone surfaces deeply scorched as if unholy fires had raged upon them long ago. Ritual pottery lay shattered across the floor, and petrified torches stood frozen in place, abandoned mid-ceremony, as though those who once worshipped here had fled in sudden terror. This was no natural cavern. The entire inner chamber had been deliberately constructed, a hidden prison temple sealed beneath the Euphrates for thousands of years. Locals nearby claimed even animals refused to approach the cave entrance. Birds avoided flying over the collapsed riverbank. Shepherds said their dogs became agitated whenever they neared the site. The fear surrounding the cavern spread quickly through nearby villages, especially after reports emerged describing whispers echoing through the walls late at night. Why build a temple of worship here beneath this river? Who were they worshiping, and what were they trying to contain? These verses are not poetic fantasy. They reveal that certain rebellious spiritual powers were bound and held for a specific time reserved until the end of the age, the discovery of this ancient chamber of forbidden worship beneath the Euphrates feels like a physical confirmation that we are approaching that appointed hour. And the deeper the team moved into the cavern, the more the mystery of the Euphrates seemed to grow darker. But before we go any further into these shocking discoveries, ask yourself this: if these signs are truly real, are we spiritually prepared for what they could mean? Make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because the next discovery hidden beneath the Euphrates is even more unsettling than just when the team thought the cave could hold no more surprises. Fear gave way to stunned silence. Deeper inside the chamber, their lights fell across something no one had expected. Scattered across the stone floor lay gold pieces of gleaming jewelry, finely crafted ornaments and treasures that could have funded entire empires. Everything was left in plain sight, not hidden in jars, not buried for safekeeping, not even gathered in haste. The wealth sat untouched, strangely preserved, as though the owners had simply walked away and never returned. The archaeologists stood motionless. In all of history's civilizations rarely abandon such riches unless something forces them to flee without a second thought. There were no signs of struggle, no broken containers, no evidence that anyone had tried to carry even a fraction of it to safety. The scene felt eerily frozen in time, a moment of sudden interruption, captured forever beneath the Euphrates. This was not a treasury carefully stored for the future. It looked like the aftermath of a people who were forced to leave everything behind in an instant. What kind of terror makes a person abandon wealth that could secure generations? What happened here that was so overwhelming they never came back for it? Jesus himself warned us about moments exactly like this. In the Gospel of Luke, he said, "Likewise also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed." And in Matthew 6:19, the Lord reminds us, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal." These treasures beneath the Euphrates stand as a sobering picture. They show how quickly earthly wealth can become worthless when judgment or sudden disaster arrives. The people who once worshipped and stored riches in this hidden place discovered that no amount of gold could save them when the moment of reckoning came. This discovery is more than archaeology. It is a warning, echoing across thousands of years. A reminder that we cannot put our hope in things that will one day be left behind. But the deeper mystery was waiting above the treasure itself. As the explorers continued sweeping their lights across the chamber, someone suddenly froze. High along the stone wall, illuminated through layers of dust and shadow, enormous hand-shaped impressions stretched across the rock. At first, the team thought they were faded paintings or stains left by mineral deposits, but the closer they moved, the stranger the markings became. These were not symbols carved into the surface. The impressions appeared pressed directly into the stone itself, as though something massive had placed its hands against the wall with tremendous force. The size alone terrified the workers. Some of the prints were nearly twice the length of a grown man's torso. Long finger-like shapes extended outward, and so it seemed outward unnaturally, while deep grooves surrounded several of the marks, cutting through the rock like claws dragged across wet clay. Researchers immediately began taking measurements, photographs, and samples, but even then no one could fully explain what they were seeing. One archaeologist later admitted the atmosphere inside the chamber changed the moment they noticed the handprints. Until then, the cave had felt ancient. Afterward, it felt inhabited. The air became heavier. Conversations grew quieter. Several workers claimed they could no longer shake the feeling that something had once stood inside that chamber, watching over the treasure buried beneath the Euphrates. What disturbed them most was the texture surrounding the marks. Dark reddish discoloration covered portions of the stone near the impressions. Some wondered if it was iron oxidation from the minerals within the cave walls. Others whispered about something far more unsettling. No one could confirm whether the stains were ancient blood, burned residue, or something entirely unknown. Yet the oppressive atmosphere surrounding the chamber made even experienced researchers visibly shaken. Geologists studying the site acknowledged the grooves did not resemble ordinary erosion patterns. Tool experts found no evidence of chisels or cutting instruments. The marks looked violent, physical, almost desperate, as if something enormous had clawed against the stone itself. And that is where many believers began drawing connections to the ancient biblical accounts of giants. Numbers 13:33 describes the terrifying moment when the Israelite spies entered Canaan and declared, "And there we saw the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers." Throughout Scripture and ancient Mesopotamian legend alike, stories emerged of mighty beings who once walked the earth before judgment fell upon them. And now, in our generation, as the Euphrates dries, these signs are being uncovered. It forces every believer to ask, if the days of Noah are returning as Jesus warned, how close are we to the moment when the Son of Man is revealed? The cave still had more to tell, but some truths are almost too heavy to carry. What kind of being would need a sword too heavy for any human soldier to lift? That question began spreading through the excavation site the moment the next chamber was uncovered beneath the Euphrates. After passing the giant handprints pressed into stone, researchers pushed deeper into the cavern and found what appeared to be a collapsed storage hall buried beneath layers of dust and black sediment. At first, the objects scattered across the ground looked like broken pillars or fragments of corroded metal. But as workers cleared away the debris, the true scale of the discovery became impossible to ignore. Massive swords longer than a grown man, spears with shafts thicker than a human arm, cracked shields leaning against the walls as though abandoned during some ancient catastrophe. Nearby rested enormous helmets and breastplates, dimensions so large that archaeologists estimated they could only fit beings standing 10 to 12 feet tall. Silence reportedly filled the chamber after the measurements were taken. Because nothing about the discovery resembled ceremonial decoration, these weapons carried weight, balance, and signs of repeated use. Deep scratches scarred portions of the armor, while sections of the blades still reflected light beneath centuries of corrosion. One researcher described the feeling as walking into the remains of a war humanity was never meant to remember. Even more disturbing were the markings covering the metal itself. Thin, glowing symbols stretched across several swords in repeating patterns, unlike ordinary ununiform or known Mesopotamian languages. Some scholars cautiously compared the inscriptions to descriptions found in ancient mystical traditions, referring to them as angelic writing. Though no consensus was reached, what shocked metallurgists most was the composition of the artifacts. Despite their enormous size, portions of the armor felt unusually light, almost impossible for their scale. And that is when many began revisiting one of the oldest and most controversial passages in Scripture. Ancient Jewish writings, like the Book of Enoch, expanded on this mystery, describing fallen beings who descended to earth and taught mankind forbidden knowledge, including the crafting of weapons and warfare itself. For centuries, many dismissed those accounts as myth or symbolism. Yet, standing inside a hidden chamber beneath the Euphrates, surrounded by weapons built for beings beyond ordinary human proportions, it becomes difficult not to wonder why stories of giants appear across nearly every ancient civilization on Earth. Were these merely legends carried through generations? Or are fragments of that forgotten world beginning to rise again from beneath the prophetic river itself? What if the deepest chamber beneath the Euphrates was never meant to be opened by human hands? By the time the excavation team reached the lowest level of the cave system, fear had already spread through the workers. Several men refused to continue underground after hearing strange metallic noises echoing beneath the stone floor during the night. Others claimed the sounds resembled chains dragging slowly across rock, followed by low groans that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper beneath the cavern itself. At first, researchers attempted to explain the noises as shifting earth caused by the collapsing riverbanks, but the further they explored, the more unsettling the structure became. Narrow passageways opened into symmetrical chambers separated by thick stone walls blackened with age. Iron rings appeared fastened directly into portions of the rock, while broken chain fragments lay buried beneath layers of dust and hardened mud. One archaeologist reportedly described the place as less like a tomb and more like a holding facility. And that single observation changed the entire atmosphere surrounding the discovery. Because for thousands of years, one prophecy has remained tied to the Euphrates River more than any other. Revelation 9:14 speaks of a moment when a voice commands, "Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates." For centuries, many believed the verse was symbolic. Others interpreted it as a future spiritual judgment hidden behind metaphor. Yet, standing inside underground chambers beneath the drying Euphrates, surrounded by chains, sealed corridors, and sounds no one could fully explain, even some skeptics admitted the parallels were difficult to ignore. The tension grew stronger when several Christian scholars studying the reports suggested these were never holy angels at all. Jude 1:6 describes beings who kept not their first estate and were reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Ancient traditions connected these imprisoned entities to rebellion, corruption, and violence before divine judgment fell upon the earth. That context gives the Euphrates an even more terrifying significance, because throughout Scripture, this river stands at the boundary between kingdoms, judgment, and the unfolding of the final days. Now, as the waters continue disappearing, hidden chambers are emerging from beneath the earth at the exact moment global instability, war, and fear continue spreading across the nations. One cannot help but notice how many disturbances are now being reported near the river itself. Strange underground vibrations, sudden collapses, unexplained sounds, villagers refusing to approach exposed cave entrances after sunset. Long before modern archaeologists stepped beneath the drying Euphrates, ancient historians were already writing about hidden passageways buried beneath Babylon itself. Their accounts sounded impossible, almost mythical stories of underground tunnels stretching beneath the river, connecting royal chambers hidden deep below the ancient world. Yet, as new cave systems continue emerging from the collapsing banks of Mesopotamia, many researchers have begun revisiting those forgotten records with growing unease. One of the earliest accounts came from Diodorus Siculus, the Greek historian who described vast vaulted tunnels constructed beneath the Euphrates during the reign of Queen Semiramis. According to his writings, the passages were lined with baked brick and sealed with bitumen to keep the river from flooding the chambers below. Bronze gates reportedly guarded the entrances hidden beneath the foundations of Babylon's royal palaces. Centuries later, Philostratus described similar underground corridors beneath the city, speaking of concealed bridges and hidden structures buried beneath the ancient empire. For generations, most scholars treated these stories as exaggerations from the ancient world. But now the conversation is changing because the further excavations move beneath the Euphrates, the more evidence suggests that vast tunnel systems may truly exist beneath Mesopotamia. And one cannot help but notice how closely this region connects to some of the most important and darkest moments in biblical history. Genesis 11:19 tells the story of Babel, where humanity gathered in rebellion against God and declared, "Go to let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven." Babylon became more than a city in Scripture. It became a symbol of pride, corruption, and mankind attempting to establish power apart from God Himself. That symbolism echoes throughout the entire Bible. The prophet Jeremiah warned of Babylon's coming destruction. Daniel stood inside its courts, interpreting divine judgment written upon the palace wall. In Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon appears once again as a representation of spiritual corruption spreading across the nations before final judgment falls upon the earth. And now, beneath the same ancient region, hidden tunnels and sealed chambers are rising back into view. Many believers see something deeply spiritual in that pattern, because throughout Scripture, hidden things eventually come into the light. Luke 8:17 declares, "For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest." The drying Euphrates is uncovering more than ruins. It is exposing reminders of humanity's oldest rebellion, kingdoms built on power, fear, and forbidden knowledge. Perhaps that is why these discoveries feel so unsettling. The tunnels beneath Babylon were never simply about architecture. They represented a civilization obsessed with reaching beyond its limits, searching beneath the earth and above the heavens for power that did not belong to mankind. For more than 1,000 years, a strange warning has followed the Euphrates River like a shadow moving through history. Long before satellites tracked the river's collapse, before archaeologists uncovered buried chambers beneath Mesopotamia, ancient Islamic scholars preserved a prophecy that deeply unsettled generations. It spoke of a day when the Euphrates would dry up and reveal a mountain of gold beneath its waters. A discovery so powerful that nations would descend into violence trying to possess it. At first, many treated the prophecy as symbolic. Others believed it referred to hidden wealth, oil reserves, or resources buried beneath the ancient riverbed. But as the Euphrates continues shrinking in our own time, reports of mineral discoveries, gold fragments, and newly exposed deposits along the collapsing banks have caused that ancient warning to return to global attention once again. Local witnesses described seeing glittering veins exposed beneath layers of dried mud after sections of the river receded. Videos circulated online showing men sifting through sediment near the exposed banks, searching for traces of precious metals. Some governments quietly restricted access to certain areas surrounding the river as tensions over water, oil, and natural resources continued growing across the region. And one cannot ignore the deeper symbolism behind it all. Because throughout history, gold has carried the power to corrupt kingdoms, destroy nations, and expose the darkest desires hidden within the human heart. Entire empires rose and collapsed, pursuing wealth they believed would secure their future. The Euphrates itself once nourished Babylon, one of the richest cities the world had ever seen. Yet, Scripture repeatedly warns that riches without God eventually become instruments of judgment. Revelation 18 describes the fall of Babylon in terrifying detail. Merchants weep as the treasures of the earth collapse around them. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones vanishes in a single hour. What humanity trusted most becomes worthless before the judgment of God. The Apostle Paul later gives another sobering warning in 1 Timothy 6:10. "For the love of money is the root of all evil." Notice the Scripture does not condemn provision or blessing. It warns about devotion, about what happens when wealth replaces God inside the human soul. That is why the prophecy surrounding the Euphrates feels so spiritually heavy, because this river has always stood at the crossroads of civilization, power, trade, and human ambition. Now, as the waters disappear, the buried treasures beneath it seem to mirror the condition of the modern world itself. Nations trembling over resources, economies growing unstable, fear spreading through financial systems built entirely on material security. And perhaps the greatest warning hidden within the mountain of gold is this: sometimes the things humanity desires most become the very things that lead it toward destruction. Before there were modern nations, before Rome rose to power, before the pyramids weathered beneath the desert sun, a narrow stretch of land between two rivers became the birthplace of human civilization. The world's earliest cities emerged there. The first written languages appeared there. Humanity learned to build, trade, govern, and conquer there. And at the center of it all flowed the Euphrates River. Ancient Mesopotamia thrived because of those waters. Farmers carved irrigation channels through dry earth, transforming wilderness into fertile fields capable of feeding entire populations. Great cities like Uruk and Babylon rose beside the riverbanks, their walls towering above trade routes crowded with merchants, priests, kings, and armies. The Euphrates became more than a river. It became the bloodstream of the ancient world itself. Yet hidden within that history is a deeper spiritual thread that stretches all the way back to the opening pages of Scripture. Genesis 2:104 speaks of a river flowing from Eden that divided into 4 heads, and among them stood the Euphrates. Long before empires existed, this river was already tied to the story of mankind's beginning. That detail carries enormous weight, because it means the Euphrates is connected both to humanity's first blessing and to humanity's earliest rebellion against God. Near these same lands, another event unfolded that forever changed human history. In Genesis 11, people gathered together in the plain of Shinar and began building Babel. They believed they could create greatness apart from the Lord, constructing a tower that would reach into heaven itself. Pride filled the hearts of men. Power became their obsession. And eventually, God scattered the nations and confused their languages across the earth. That spirit never truly disappeared. Babylon later rose from the same region as one of the richest and most powerful kingdoms the world had ever known. Nebuchadnezzar ruled from its palaces. Daniel interpreted visions within its courts. The prophet Jeremiah warned of its judgment. Then, centuries later, Revelation 17 would once again speak of Mystery Babylon, a final symbol of corruption, wealth, and rebellion before the return of Christ. For thousands of years, the people of God held on to that promise during seasons of chaos. The prophet spoke of a coming king who would establish justice where corruption once ruled and bring peace to a world exhausted by violence. Isaiah saw a time when nations would beat their swords into plowshares and no longer learn war anymore. Imagine the weight of those words in a world like ours, where generation after generation has known conflict, bloodshed, and fear. The ancient prophets were not describing temporary political peace. They were speaking of divine rule. Revelation 20 describes a period unlike anything humanity has ever experienced. Satan is restrained. Deception loses its grip upon the nations. Christ reigns openly, and those who remained faithful share in his kingdom. For centuries, theologians debated the details of this 1,000-year reign. Yet, the heart of the prophecy remains clear. God does not abandon the earth to darkness forever. That hope becomes even more powerful when placed beside the discoveries emerging from beneath the Euphrates. Because throughout this journey, we have seen symbols of war buried underground, giant weapons, chains, hidden chambers, ancient civilizations consumed by pride. Humanity's history beneath Mesopotamia feels stained by violence and rebellion stretching back to the earliest chapters of Genesis. Yet the Bible declares that one day Christ will reverse that curse entirely. Micah 4 paints an extraordinary picture of that future kingdom. Families resting without fear, nations no longer threatening one another, peace replacing survival. It is the complete opposite of the instability now spreading across the modern world. And maybe that contrast is exactly why these prophecies matter so much today. The earth feels restless. Kingdoms are uncertain. Economies tremble. The Euphrates itself, once a symbol of life and civilization, now reveals buried reminders of humanity's broken condition. But for believers, these signs are not meant to produce hopelessness. They are reminders that history is moving toward a conclusion already known by God. Jesus Christ remains at the center of that story. The same scriptures warning about judgment also promise restoration. The same Bible that speaks of the Euphrates drying also speaks of a king returning to heal what sin destroyed. And perhaps that is the deeper message hidden beneath all these ancient discoveries. Ecclesiastes 3:15 says, "God requireth that which is past." The scriptures repeatedly warn that hidden things will one day be brought into the open. In Daniel 2, kingdoms rose and collapsed exactly as God declared. In Genesis, mankind gathered in Babylon, believing they could reach heaven through their own power. Yet pride brought confusion upon the earth. And now, near the same ancient lands, the world is watching history uncover itself layer by layer. One cannot help but think about the words of Isaiah 24:20. "The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard," because everywhere we look, the foundations of the modern world appear to be shaking. Yet the greatest warning in Scripture was never about rivers, kingdoms, or hidden caves. It was always about the condition of the human heart. Jesus said in Luke 12:40, "Be ye therefore ready also, for the Son of Man cometh at an hour when ye think not." So tonight, as the Euphrates reveals what was buried for centuries, perhaps the deeper question is this: are these discoveries uncovering ancient history or exposing how close humanity may be to the fulfillment of prophecy? Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this message touched your spirit, leave a prayer to Jesus in the comments and stand boldly in your faith. May the Lord protect your home, strengthen your heart, and guide you through the uncertainty of these times. And may we all remain watchful, faithful, and ready for the return of the